As we all know from the news this week, election season is well underway in this, the world's largest democracy. But today, while everybody is focused on the results and which party is actually going to win the election and form the new government, I'd like to turn your attention away somewhere else. I'd like us to think about the people who actually make Indian elections possible in the first place. If we remember our civics textbooks, yes, the ones we committed to memory when we were students but promptly forgot as citizens, there are 543 Lok Sabha constituencies in a general election. And Indians vote for these 543 representatives across 9 lakh polling stations across this country. There are 11 million government workers who ensure that every single citizen who shows up to vote can actually cast their vote. The actual polling station is manned by a number of people from the lower rungs of the bureaucracy. Many of them are actually school teachers, primary school teachers from the government system, and a large number of them are actually drawn from different departments of government. They staff polling booths from the capital cities to the most isolated rural hamlets. For those of you who have watched the film Newton, you have seen them in action. But for those of you who have voted in an election, you have seen them too. Right? After the election, they rejoin lakhs of Indian men and women who staff our basic public services. These are frontline workers who staff our health and nutrition systems. They are sanitation workers, water engineers. They are the people who provide our postal services and our railway services. They are the ones who actually do our birth and death registrations, right, which all of us have had to do. They are the people who are our constables and our sub-inspectors and myriad other functionaries who actually staff what we would call the front line of the Indian state. They are the first point of contact that the Indian citizen has with the public system and with public services. They are our most numerous and most unacknowledged public servants. They are the everyday Indian state. Now, as an anthropologist, I'm an anthropologist, we are enchanted by the everyday. We find magic in the mundane. And as many of my colleagues and others would like to say, we make the familiar unfamiliar and the unfamiliar familiar. Now, there is not much that is more mundane and boring than studying the Indian public system or our bureaucracy with its dusty files and familiar stench. But for me, the state actually came to life, and the stakes of the state came to life when I began fieldwork. In my case, it began as a 21-year-old when I went in pursuit of looking at Nari Adalats, which are women's courts run by rural women in Gujarat. I then studied the Bombay police and Bombay constables, who I found are actually incredibly poetic reflectors on their everyday life. I've spent time studying public health workers in states like Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. I've spent many hours with public functionaries who man our market yards, where agricultural produce moves from field to market. And most recently, my students and I have been studying patwaris, who are the land record keepers for land titles in western Uttar Pradesh. Some of my most important insights on power and on knowledge have come from their company. And one of them is this. The frontline worker actually lives out this very paradoxical position. On the one hand, they are actually systemically under-resourced and disempowered, right? But in particular contexts, in their interactions with citizens, they are actually hyper-empowered, right? So think about like a health worker when you have a patient in distress. Think about the power of the person who gets to fix your land record if you are a farmer who depends upon that land. Think about the person who needs to get their ration card, right? Think about the police constable. When I was doing my field work, I read a story which says, anyone can be a cop, and it reported about how police constables in Bombay are sometimes left buying the accessories of their uniform on the street from street hawkers outside the police station. Right? They then promptly have to wear that uniform and kick the street hawker off the street, right? this irony is not lost on frontline workers. They know it best of all. They know more than Bollywood scriptwriters about what is villainy and what is heroism, and they understand that double role all too well, right? Now, in this context, while this is funny, actually in this context, what do we have? We have public systems that run on frustration and that produce arbitrary outcomes. Actually, the only thing consistent about this system is that it produces arbitrary outcomes, right? But for those of us in this room, these arbitrary outcomes might seem like an inconvenience. For most Indian citizens, they are a matter of making or breaking their lives. So what do we do? How do we change this system from one that runs on systemic disempowerment to one that actually flips over and works on institutional empowerment? For starters, we must begin by actually investing and building the Indian state. Right? Contrary to popular opinions that we have the most bloated bureaucracy in the world, by most global standards of functionaries per capita, looking at our population, the Indian state actually is one of the thinnest states in the world. Right? We have actually, you mentioned IAS officers, we have actually only 5,000 IAS officers, the elite cadre of the Indian civil services across state and central government. Right? So this is a very small number, and the vacancies only get greater. Our state runs on chronic vacancies and shortages. But what about those in positions of power? Right? How do we change? So one of the most important things is to stop thinking that all public functionaries are lazy, loutish, venal, corrupting, and corruptible people, right? We can't begin with that premise. It's not that this is not a problem. It is, in fact, a very real problem. But we begin from somewhere else. We begin from trying to understand the context within which they work and trying to understand the multiple sources of motivation. And the more time you spend with them, the more you realize how much they know. We have a lot to learn from community health workers about how to improve health-seeking behavior or immunization coverage. I tell you, Bombay's water engineers can tell you a thing or two about how to fix or not to fix leaks in a leaky system, right? So the first thing is to pay attention to them. And one of the things we have discovered from large-scale programs is that we need to actually understand that the front line is a place of problem solving, right? And problem solving needs flexibility. So we need large-scale systems that actually enhance resources and enhance flexibility, not decrease flexibility, right? Monitoring and accountability is critical for all of this, but we actually need to give people more discretion rather than less to make services reach the final thing. I'd just like to end by saying that public systems are important for all of us, even those of us who are amongst the most private or privatized citizens in this country. For most Indians, they are lifelines. So we have to change our imagination about how to engage with these systems and how to strengthen them and how to think about them. And this is a difficult, difficult task. But one place to start would be to realize that both ends of the last mile, there is a person. Thank you.